Reassuring. Morning, everybody who's here in Digby, and morning, everybody, wherever you are. Hopefully warm and cozy, wearing fluffy slippers, and I hope somebody's in a onesie and, you know, making the full advantage of being at home. I'm going to do my best to look at everybody and probably fail miserably, and yeah, but anyway, we'll do our best. So for those of you who I don't know, I'm Anne Fox. I'm the Chief Exec of Clinks, and I think connection is a great word for us to be with you today. Clinks is a collective, a network of hopefully most of the charities and social enterprises that work with people in the criminal justice system. So people in prison, people on their release from prison, people who are serving community sentences or on probation, and the families of those people. And so what we do at Clinks, Hannah, my colleague, and others, we've got a couple of colleagues on the online meeting today, our job is to help people like Mary Claire and her team to do their job, because that job is incredibly valuable. The state has its function and its purpose, but in order for people to have the futures that they deserve and the futures that they need, there needs to be another way. There needs to be connections made with people who understand your true potential and want to make that shine, and that's their purpose. So that's what we do. We bring those organizations together, connecting them, and we connect them to other things that are going on. So very thankful to Mary Claire's team this morning, who helped facilitate me so I could have a meeting with the prison service about some more connections we're trying to make with some specialist organizations. And hopefully that's something that some of the groups here today will benefit from. So we've been knocking around for a very long time, and on the screen actually I saw a long time Clinks trustee, Mr. Steve Rollins. So it's lovely to know that he's there as well. Clinks has been knocking around since 1997, and we have 600 members. We do all sorts of different things. We get all sorts of notions and crazy ideas at different times. And a few years ago, I had the notion to ask a man if he could ask the government to get him to do a review into family ties in prison. So I have a background in work around families. I also have a passion. I am an Irish Catholic with 62 first cousins on the Catholic side and 9 on the Protestant side. That's how it works. And I'm from a big family, and my family experience is relatively good in that no matter what life threw at us, and there was quite a lot of difficulty at times, the family itself was a force for good. And I've always been really into families. I've always been really into kind of my own identity coming from that big family that, you know, I can't get away from, and I wouldn't, you know. Here I am at the tender age of 48, and I'm rebuilding my life after a family tragedy, and I've come back to the West Midlands where my parents met in 1964, bought a house on the street where they used to live, where from my auntie when she passed away, and I'm starting again with my 2 kids. And here I am, a mile from where I first got off a bus when I first moved here in 1992. I don't know if that pub still does those breakfasts and books of where you can get jobs, but yeah, so it's lovely to be here in Brum, and it's lovely to be connecting with everybody. So what on earth was the farmer review?
I need to just make sure that they're connected online.
Oh, right,
sorry.
yeah.
2 seconds. For some reason.
That's working. Yeah.
Is that working now?
It did.
Sets to come from current slide. No, so hang on, it's working on there, but not. Try that one.
I reckon we can do that.
Yeah.
And then we do it without them and send them to people. I think they can see it.
They are now, but we just, what you need to do, just click on those. Then is that all right? Sorry.
Oh yeah, no problem.
So I'll leave you.
Yeah. Okay. If anything goes wrong with the slides, give us a wave or whatever. So each year it's estimated that 312,000 children are impacted by parental imprisonment. As the prison population continues to rise, so does the number of children impacted. this is Lord Farmer, Michael Farmer. He's quite interested in families, but he has no real reason to be. And he had no, until a few years ago, he had no interest or knowledge about prisons.
Keep talking, I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, it's working.
Right. Duplicate screen.
Right, I'm going to keep talking.
Yeah, do it.
Good at that.
Do it.
Always get a Dublin review. Not quite sure how it's going to go talking wise. So Lord Farmer was commissioned by the Ministry of Justice to carry out a review into family ties of adult men in prison. So we started with adult men. We did a second review, which he led more on his own, into women's experiences of family ties, and that was both in prison and in the community. And the rationale for that difference, a lot of which being that many women who are sentenced to prison then lose custody of their children. So relationships when you come out with children is really important to understand some, you know, the connections around social work and support. So that's why that one was done slightly differently. So we think, yeah, these slides working. Right, okay. So what we did, I'm going to quickly tell you what we did, because, you know, it's quite a long time ago now. But really importantly, I wanted to point out that in both of these reviews, you know, government reviews get done all the time. And I think for me, this one is different in two aspects that I'm really pleased about. The first one being that it was very much influenced by the people that it was for. And that's not easy to do, actually, to do reviews, government reviews that hear from people in prison. So with the Farmer Review, and because of who we are at Clinks, we did all of our work with organisations that work with people in prison. So National Prison Radio built an ad for us and an ad campaign. We had loads of families organisations, did loads of work and got surveys to people. And we heard from 1,000 men in prison and their families and voluntary organisations and academics. Now, usually when there is a government review, the voluntary organisations and the academics are the vast majority of people. We heard from 1,000 men in prison and their families. That was the biggest group of people who contributed their views to the Farmer Review, were the people that it was for. Now, I know as the percentages go, it's not a very big percentage of people in prison, but it's a huge engagement from people in prison. And men in prison designed the survey, and their families designed the family survey. When we did the women's review, we heard from 372 women in prison, which was about 10% of the female prison population at the time. So really important for us that those reviews were informed by the people who were living that system. The other thing that's really important for me is, you know, this was being done at the time of lots of reviews. So we'd had Dame Sally Coates had done a review into education. A couple of years later, David Lammy did a review into race within the criminal justice system. Lord Farmer's review, every single recommendation was accepted, bar none. And implementation we're going to go on to in a little bit, but we're proud of that. So it was a review that was very much informed by the people who were living the system, and it's a review that has been accepted as the right thing to do. And we still have a way to go, but let's have a look at that. So I wanted to just talk through some of the findings and some of the things that the review told us. And for many of you, I'll be teaching me granny how to suck eggs, because you'll know all about this and it makes perfect common sense. But as my late husband's mate from Barbados used to always say, common sense ain't so common. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that sometimes we need a particular channel or a particular opportunity to tell us what we know already. But what we found very much in the review was that families are assets. So there might be some exceptions where people, you know, people's family relationships are complex and maybe those relationships aren't the most pro-social ones that they could have. But people responding to the review overwhelmingly felt that families weren't properly recognised in the prison system and by the prison system as assets. Now, I want to be careful when I use the word asset. It doesn't mean that you utilise families as a route to rehabilitation, but it's to think about actually most people in prison have a family on the outside. And that thinking about how that family helps that person to have their future, because they're going to come back to that family, or they might want to come back to that family. So to really think about that, how that can be an asset. Families have unique knowledge of the family member. They're able to provide support that professionals can't offer. So it's to really think about how you get those partnerships with people and their families. We found that there's real innovation and good interventions. So there was no shortage of good family work. What there was a complete shortage of was consistency. So every prison did it differently. Even organizations that worked in 2 prisons did it differently. People did brilliant work for 2 years while they were funded by the Barracarby Trust or Tudor Trust or whichever organization. Individuals did it differently. And although that gives people some great opportunities in certain prisons at certain times, what it doesn't give you is a system that's doing the right thing in the best way all the time. We found that families and men and women in prison are keen to share their experiences. They want to talk about it. They want to make things better. And in a lot of cases, what we found, the motivation was for the children. So if children were involved, or with the younger men that we worked with, when their families, particularly elderly parents, were involved, their motivation was to make things better, so that that experience was better for their families. But this is the thing, and this is the thing about connections. What we found is relationships are absolutely key. They're absolutely vital. That an ongoing positive relationship with someone who cares is key. Many people in prison may have very complex or broken family ties. So we did a particular focus group with young people and young adults who were care experienced prior to prison. And I want to pay particular tribute to our late colleague, Darren Coyne from the Care Leavers Association, who ran those sessions for us. We wanted to understand what it was. If family wasn't a safe thing for you, or wasn't a positive thing, what did you need? And what people need are relationships. And we find this in the voluntary sector. We find, whenever I come to New Leaf, whenever I meet up for a cup of tea and a cake with Marie Claire, we're good at doing that as well. It's about relationships, it's about those connections you make with people and those connections that you help people make for themselves. We also found that hope has a real place in the system. Having family connections when you're in prison gives you hope. There was actually quite a lot of evidence on this, but we found it. Allowing people to look towards the future, to think of themselves as a family member, to continue to be in that family role. So one of the sets of interventions we looked into was the Invisible Walls Wales project, which works out of HMP Park in Bridgend in South Wales, where they have a whole family wing where men voluntarily get a place on that wing for a period of time to think about how to be a better family man, how to be the father they want to be, how to be the partner they want to be, how to be the son, the brother, the cousin they want to be. And that hope, that sense of focus in yourself, belief that things can be different, that was a real motivating factor for people to do then the things within prison that will help them when they come out, in addition to strengthening those relationships for themselves. We found, particularly for men who were fathers just before they came into prison or when they were in prison, that was a real motivator about, an opportunity to change, or an opportunity to maybe open themselves up to those things that they'd ever felt they deserved before. Sorry, that was my own fault. So as I said already, practice and provision vary. I can't say how much it did. It really is. It's a matter of potluck. So if you use the example here, you've got Marie Claire and the team, brilliant at convincing people of the potential and the art of the possible. You've been able to do brilliant work in HMP Birmingham. Prison down the road maybe doesn't have that going on, or they have another project for another couple of years. And we really find the practice and provision varies. We couldn't underestimate the importance of the visit, the physical act of the visit, the connection, the opportunity for connection, to stay in touch. We found lots of issues with visits, mainly around inconsistency and unfairness, and trying to understand how you best schedule them, particularly for larger families. We did some particular work looking at Romani, Gypsy and Irish traveller families, about how, family mine, the size of mine, tries to visit their loved one at once. What do you do? The importance of family days and social visits. But we also found that the ways in which people keep in contact are, in prison, you've got to think about them so much more. They're limited and they're rationed and they're really expensive. So phone calls and contact, the absolutely outrageous cost of a phone call. And particularly now, we did our review in 2017 and everybody had mobiles, but even now more so many people have gotten rid of landlines, so there's no alternative to call. And the cost of phones and the cost of phone calls from prisons and how expensive that was. And we found that technology had a huge place and huge potential. And we were met with a lot of barriers around technology. And then the pandemic came and made those barriers kind of go away, at least temporarily. So the review made a number of recommendations. Both reviews made a number of recommendations. And in each case, they were accepted by government in full, which is pretty rare. Right? Now, I like to think the party was so practical, and it was people's actual experience of what was going on. And it was the spirit in which people gave the recommendation. So we were very pragmatic. We spent time with officials, talking about the things that people said were important and the things they wanted to do. And we worked on those recommendations, not to not be aspirational, but to be practical and pragmatic. So we talked, for example, about introducing the idea of maybe having a visit over a video. What do you think about it now? And everybody's here watching on Zoom. But the idea that even in 2017 was like going to the moon. But also, how could we do it? And wouldn't it be risky? And if you remove the risk, we were talking about this earlier with Birmingham colleagues, that all of a sudden when you have to do it, it can happen. For us, we didn't want everybody to have video calls. We thought they would be important to try out, but also we never wanted them to replace visits. We wanted them to enhance and to add to visits. And that would still, so you won't hear me say video visits, you'll hear me say video calls. Visits are very much a physical thing. But for example, people who had family who maybe really couldn't make that distance, or for whom the physical journey might be too much, for national prisoners, for example, maybe you could convert people's allowance of visits and entitlement to visits to video call time or to phone credit. So we looked at all of these things. So the recommendations looked at things like how far away somebody was housed in prison from their family and where they were going to be. So distance from home and being nearer to home, having a family strategy in every prison, having a plan about, how you support people's family relationships, a local offer of support with consistency, focusing on family relationships in prison inspections, governors having accountability and performance measurements. So, when you meet any prison governor, they say to you, if HMI prisons are going to come and inspect, or, the prison service is going to count it, then it's going to matter to me, because, you've always got so much time, so much money, so many staff, and all these priorities. So we really felt we had to get this made a priority. The importance of supporting people's family contact from the first night in prison and helping families to escalate concerns about their loved ones. Now, this was huge for us. We met with families who said, particularly when prisoners are transferred around the country, that they didn't know where their loved one was, and their loved one might not know where they were exactly. And being able to stay in touch and to know that the person is all right, but also being able to tell the prison if you think that that person is in danger, if you think that they sounded not like themselves. If somebody told you they loved you for the first time ever, the alarm bells that might ring for a partner or a mother, who then can contact, in an ideal situation, the prison to let them know that you think that person is in trouble. And that's a big thing for us in the review. And it is one of the areas where there is still work happening. Not all of these things are where they need to be. And as somebody who was involved in the review, I am impatient for that. And I want to make sure that, COVID allowed some of it to speed up, but in a lot of cases, COVID has obviously been very unhelpful. But where there is a will, I have a great belief that where there is a will, there is a way, and we need to get the will back to making this implemented 100%. We also made recommendations about use of temporary release for the development and maintenance of relationships. So people coming out on home visits, people coming out to be able to spend time with their family, to continue to keep those relationships, to do normal things. Because the experience of visiting a loved one in prison or any other institution it's weird, it's alien. I was reminded by the gentleman in the front earlier. So my dad bounced in and out of rehab my whole childhood, and it was the weirdest thing. You go and visit your dad in a rehab clinic. They had nice biscuits, don't get me wrong. You didn't have to pay for anything. It was warmer in our house. But it is a strange, it's not your normal relationship. You're able to come home and you're able to, you know, take part. We did a workshop with men who talked about, like, this guy said he went home to the house that he built for himself and his wife and asked her if he could have a biscuit. You know, he said, I'm like a man child. And he kept talking about this. He's in prison for 8 years. He said, and what use am I to her when I come out and I don't know how to do things? And he said, you know, and now they have the internet here and the kids had different games. But if he was home on weekends and he could do those things and he could be part of, you know, the maintenance of this house, that he said, you know, I'm the only one who knows how to do the wiring. I didn't want to look. It sounded like it might be a bit of a mess. But important for people to keep those roles and to be able to have those roles when they come out. So really important for us, those recommendations. So where are we? So I've got a couple of updates from the prison service on what they would say, where things are at, and we're hoping to have formal updates. So one of the things we talked about in the review is we wanted them to publish updates regularly. So we'll have those in the spring. So there is a strengthening prisoners' family ties policy framework, which includes mandatory action. So colleagues here from Birmingham Prison will know there are things that they absolutely have to do. One of those things is you must have a local family strategy in every prison. Now, I know people say, well, that's a bit boring and it's a bit wet, but actually, to my mind, if it's not written down what you're going to do, A, how will you know what to do, and how will anybody else say, how are you getting on there with your local family strategy, and keeping it to account? So the Visitors Council and the work that you do at Birmingham is thinking, you know, are you interrogating that family strategy? Do you know what's in it? When's the next chance it comes up for review? There is a performance measure now. Prisons are measured on their family and significant other services, and they are linked directly to the recommendations of the review. There are recommendations around gateway communications, particularly from a safer custody point of view, when people have concerns about people in prison. And there's some work happening with one of the organisations has been funded to develop kind of best practice models that could be rolled out across prisons. Changing culture within the prison service to enable that golden thread, to think families first. You know, how are we helping people? And difficult as it was and slow as it was, I think if it wasn't for this work being so important at that time, I don't think we would have got anything within prisons in COVID as quickly as we did. It was very long, it was too long, but I think quicker in the kind of relative terms. Change in practice through learning and development, training staff, all of this stuff is happening. COVID did absolutely cause delays, but created other opportunities. And I think the video call or the purple visit has been the standout there. We still have variability, we still have inconsistency, and that really needs to be watched. In terms of the women's review, 25 of the 33 recommendations have been 33. I made it up and say that number. They've been actioned to date, and those, so there's still some work to do. Again, that was in prison and the community, and there's going to be a progress report early next year. There's been quite a lot of work in the women's review about the importance of the information that goes to sentencers, to courts, to judges and magistrates, because you can affect the sentence that you give a woman with consideration to whether or not she's the primary caregiver of children, but that information isn't collected very well. So, and that's putting it mildly. So the pre-sentence report pilot that was done in this aid memoir to improve sentencing of women, especially mothers, has come in. There's been some improvement integrated into probation reforms for women. particularly primary carers. And there's some challenge to the basis for residential women's centres. So there's this idea from the Ministry of Justice to have residential women's centres, but a lot of us in the sector really don't want those to be there. And we would prefer there to be community alternatives where women stay with their children. There are expectations now in the inspections of prisons, women's prisons, around the importance of, managing family ties or maintaining family ties. I was having a fat finger fail there when I did that one, sorry. Reforms to release on temporary licence are proposed, and we hope will be coming on stream. And there was quite an important review done by the Chief Social Worker for Children and Families, so that a role within the Department for Education. And she looked at the applications made in a year to mother and baby units within women's prisons and drew out some very important learning about what needs to happen now. And the Ministry of Justice are now considering those and due to respond quite soon. So overall, I would say there's a lot going on. We're not there yet. COVID was helpful in one regard only, but actually I don't think we ever would have got video calls without it. I remember being invited to, a very important event in a prison about technology, and it was actually the burying of fibre optic cable in a trench, and the whole thing about technology. I think COVID just made that possible, and that's not to underestimate how challenging it is to do change, but I think things that might be seen as risky are always going to be the hardest. So that's helped, but in most other cases, we still have a way to go. What I would say to you all is that if families matter to you, for people in prison and for people on the outside who have loved ones in prison, keep talking about this review. Ask people, where is your prison up to? Where are we at? Where can we go next? I think we still have the potential to really revolutionise how people's ability to have a good relationship with somebody who loves them back. I think we still have potential to make sure that that's really fostered and that flourishes. Because if we don't, what prison does is harms relationships. What prison does is harms people's ability to keep relationships, make relationships. And it removes that potential and everything else. And it harms so many more people than the person behind our door. So thank you for listening. And congratulations on 3 brilliant years.
Yeah, questions? Any questions from the organisations and stuff?
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on families, because in second marriage of many years passing, we've got loads of kids and loads of grandkids. And there we are. Next Tuesday, I will be in Stafford Prison, masquerading as Santa, handing out the presents to the children on a family day. And I wonder why more prisons don't do this, because it seems to me that if you can bring a bit of the outside inside and do what you would normally do at home, but do it in the prison, it can only benefit everybody. Not only the family, the children and the wives, partners, whatever, but the men inside, the staff, who are going to be a happy clientele to look after and keep safe. There's just no argument against doing it. But why doesn't everybody do it? I don't understand. And if I was to say to the governor at Stafford, who I know very well, I'll tell you what, Ian, we'll take a few pictures, we'll put it up on Facebook and that. Oh my God, no! There's huge reasons for not doing it. And I know because I've done it once and I've got told off about it.
I don't think there's any reasons. I would say there's a lot of excuses.
Yeah, well, possibly. But how do you get it out there that the family is so important? It's vitally important.
I think my answer to that would be just do it. If you have the idea, just do it. I think that excuse, that fear is about the Daily Mail. Imagine, and particularly in a climate like, the cost of living crisis, because there's this idea of the innocent family and the guilty family. And we need to just blow that one up as a complete myth. And even I have a lot of difficulty with this, the family are innocent and the person is innocent. Family life is complicated anyway, right? Life is complicated. But it does nobody any benefit to separate people for a period of time, but then put them back together. The joint inspectorates of prison, probation, and other inspectorates basically came up with the quote that inspired the Farmer Review, which was the family was the single most effective rehabilitation resettlement agency, better than any government body. And you've got to keep that capacity strong. You've got to nurture it. You've at the very least not to damage it. And it does nobody any benefit for people not to be able to say Happy Christmas to each other or Happy Birthday. And we saw some wonderful things. When we were in Park, it was a really weird little area, family room. I think it was donated by the local B&Q or a garden centre. So I had a fish tank and some fake nesting and a palm tree. But you could go over there to, you know, sit on garden furniture and have a proper chat. And particularly, it was very nice if there was stuff going on in the family. So I was talking to this man who the day before had met his daughter's fiance, because he hadn't met him before. And he asked him for his daughter's hand in marriage, which his 5 daughters before had done. And then what they were able to do is he was able to go up and buy tea and cake and whatever they had and have that family celebration. The big issue is about that getting out and us saying that when people are in prison, they don't deserve that and their families don't deserve it. And I would just think the more of us that just let that one slide, the better. Because actually the evidence is you keep those relationships going, the person is more likely to have a strong relationship, which is what they're going to need. Because the other services aren't there. It is their family. It's their family and friends that will keep that going.
I think you're right.
I'm just wondering if there's anybody online with any
I
questions.
think there is some hands online and there's some more hands in the
Do you
room.
want to unmute yourself in the online audience if you've got a question for Anne?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. I work in a medium secure unit in Birmingham. So our service users have had contact with the criminal justice system, and we get referrals from prisons and other hospitals. And they've also got mental health problems. Your presentation was really interesting, actually, because I wasn't aware that there was a strategy for prisons around family support. But one of the problems families have encountered is that if somebody's in prison and they become mentally unwell, they get referred to us. We go out and do an assessment, but then they get transferred to us in the medium secure unit. The family isn't made aware of that movement. So what I found, because my job role is to support the family and carers. So when I talk to the families, eventually when I trawl through loads of paperwork to find their contact details, they say, like, one mum said she thought her son was dead because she hadn't had contact with him for about 3 months. But the prison didn't make her aware that he was being transferred to us. So how do we get around that, or what should the prisons be doing to support families when prisoners get transferred to a mental health facility?
Well, I think any facility, including another prison, it happens a lot. Those things, the system's not set up to talk to, the prisons, the walls and gates, and they're really good at kind of permeating those barriers. And there's a lot of other challenges. What we found, what's been recommended is 2 pieces around that. One is looking at the importance of information going with people themselves. So there was a recommendation, some work being done around when people go to court, that actually the phone numbers that are needed go with them.
Okay.
Because a lot of the time they don't, and particularly now people go in with a mobile phone and the mobile phone's taken away. And I don't know my mother's phone number. I don't, and I don't know how many people who do, but how many people will go to court today and won't be able to give that phone number. So the phone numbers and the contact details, almost like, a donor card and an emergency contact card that you would carry. And that would also be very helpful to people in prison. Somebody arrives and they're intoxicated or they're very unwell, and you want to talk to somebody else about this person who can't talk to me right now. Then the second thing is the gateway communication. So that system that will allow the escalation of concerns to go in the right way. And that work is happening now. And it's been trialled in a number of prisons by the Prison Advice and Care Trust Pact. They should be reporting on that quite soon, I think. So, stay in touch with the network and we'll get that news out. But I think it's about asking the individual prison what their plans are around that, because framework is there.
Yeah, okay. And you also spoke about a strategy for families of people in prison.
Each
Is
prison is
that,
supposed to have a strategy.
oh,
about
they're
families, yeah.
supposed to, oh.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah,
would,
Birmingham does, you know, certain
Oh,
prisons, Stafford does, quite good in the Midlands prisons, actually, yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
So would I have to make contact with the prison to get a copy of that, or?
I'd imagine so.
Yeah,
yeah.
okay,
It might not necessarily be published, but they have to have
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
yeah.
Okay,
But if
thank you
want to
very
talk about
much.
Visitors Council,
All right, thank you.
take a question from the chocolate bar. Is that all right?
Just, sort of good question to finance about the reviews and all that. Sometimes the person, my point of view is that we talk about it employability, but connecting to cutting the changing and keeping back on stage. We're interested to see if there's a direct correlation between two family times, especially between communication between everybody that are inside, the families that are outside, people that can be there and helping guys and everything back in.
Yeah, there is. So this was one of the things we got in the review as well. People gave us that academic evidence, quite a lot of evidence to say, which is really why we wanted to do it, that Lord Farmer talks about it being the third leg of the stool. And I think it was a monk who founded St. Mungo's used to say, you need someone to love, somewhere to live, something to do. You know, they're the things that keep you stickier to the outside than the in. So the whole point of this, actually, from a prison service and MOJ point of view, is actually to reduce reoffending. That was the whole purpose of it, was to look at, can you do that? Can we improve what happens when people are in prison in order to stop them coming back and improve their outcomes? And that's, you know, so there is, and actually the review, you can get the review on the MOJ website. It lists lots of that evidence. You know, some of it's a little bit old now, aren't we all? Right, Claire, are you chairing your questions or do you want me to? The lady behind you has had her hand up.
Hi, my name is Raji. I'm the CEO and Finance Director of Hamid, and we support families of offenders and prisoners and people who are in custody. And we work with a lot of Asian families. And what we found that everything that you said on there is bang on. And they have what we find as well with the families. We've got language barriers, huge language barriers. And also the other aspect is that we deal with a lot of females, so the services are the mothers or sisters or daughters and whatever, and the mental health issues is one of the key things that we find for the families that are outside of suffering, because they don't want families to know, or they don't share their issues with extended families, or so they keep it to themselves. And I think for people like us out here who support and offer that service to families is really, really crucial. So that's what I'd like to say that.
Yeah, and your work is brilliant. We're big fans of My Haven at Clinks. I just wanted to say that there's quite a lot of the evidence that we were given in the review. You know, we were really lucky and people shared lots of stuff with us. But there's a body of evidence that say some men can go in and kind of do, you know, a hard time where they do the time, they don't stay in touch with the family, they don't, you know, they'll kind of remove themselves in order to get through. What pretty much 99% of women try and be the mother while they're in prison. So, you know, we had a focus group of women who talked about a big fight that broke out between two women in a fight for the phone, because they were both trying to get their kids up out of bed to go to school. They were both about 100 miles from these children. There was nothing they could do, you know, but it was so important. They were trying to keep it together. They were trying to do that and be the mother of children that, you know, they couldn't even be with. They didn't know when they were going to see them again. And it's really important that we remember that, you know, what are people's roles, particularly I think in families where you will have a different kind of, maybe from the dominant culture, you know, certainly whenever I would meet Irish traveller families, you know, they're like, you understand it, but they don't get it here. You know, there's 15 of us and we all have to come on the same day, you know, and because that's the family. So I think it's really important that we see how important actually being still part of your family is to your mental health, and enabling families to know when there are concerns and to flag those on that gateway system. I think is really important. Using up all the time.
Thank you. No, yeah, thank you. Again,
The details are there. Get in touch.